You are not alone in this world. Not really. Stand outside on a clear night. Look up, and somewhere in the back of your skull, something ancient stirs. A feeling that something is watching. Something close. Something almost like you, but not quite. For most of human history, that feeling was real. For hundreds of thousands of years, you shared this planet with another kind of human. They built fires. They buried their dead with flowers. They painted their faces with red ochre and made jewelry from eagle talons and shells. They cared for their injured and kept their elderly alive long past usefulness. They were not beasts. They were people. And then, roughly 40,000 years ago, they vanished. The Neanderthals are gone. But here is the question that paleoanthropologists, scientists who study ancient human relatives, have quietly debated for decades. What if they hadn't? What if, right now, on a planet with 8 billion modern humans, there were also a few 100,000 Neanderthals? This is not science fiction. It is a thought experiment grounded in hard evidence. And the answer is far stranger and far more uncomfortable than you might expect. Let's start with who they actually were. Neanderthals lived in Europe and Western Asia for roughly 400,000 years. That is not a typo. For 100,000 years. Your entire species, Homo sapiens, has existed for perhaps 300,000 years, and civilization as you know it is only about 10,000 years old. Neanderthals were ancient when your ancestors were still figuring out how to cross a river. They were not hunched, dim brutes. That image, the slouching cave dweller dragging a club, was invented by a flawed 1908 reconstruction of a skeleton found in La Chapelle aux Saints, France. The skeleton turned out to belong to an elderly man with severe arthritis. Researchers corrected this decades ago, but the caricature stuck. The real Neanderthal was stocky and powerful, built for cold. Shorter limbs, wider torsos, enormous barrel chests. Every feature was an adaptation for conserving heat in Ice Age Europe. Their brains were, on average, slightly larger than yours. Not slightly smaller. Larger. What they did with that brain is still being pieced together. In 2010, a research team led by Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology published the first draft of the Neanderthal genome, the full genetic instruction manual for a Neanderthal. What they found rearranged everything. Neanderthals and modern humans did not simply coexist. They interbred. Repeatedly. If you have any ancestry outside of sub-Saharan Africa, between 1 and 4% of your DNA is Neanderthal. It is in your immune system, your skin, your risk factors for certain diseases. They are not gone. They are inside you. But what if more of them had survived? What if a population had held on in some isolated valley in northern Europe or the mountains of Western Asia, the way isolated pockets of other species have survived extinction events? What would that world look like? To answer that, you need to understand what probably killed them. The honest answer is that we are not entirely sure. The leading theories cluster around 3 explanations: competition with modern humans, climate instability, or a combination of both. A 2019 study published in the journal Nature Communications, led by researcher Christ Vaesen of Eindhoven University, modeled Neanderthal population dynamics and found something striking. Even without any violence or direct competition from modern humans, a small, scattered population like the Neanderthals would have been vulnerable to extinction through simple demographic bad luck. Low genetic diversity, high infant mortality, inbreeding in isolated groups. Any one of these could tip a thin population toward collapse. They were already on the edge. Your ancestors arriving in Europe may have simply pushed them over it. Competition did not have to mean warfare. It probably did not. Competition means that when 2 groups need the same prey animals in the same forest, and one group is slightly more efficient at coordinating hunts through complex language and larger social networks, one group slowly eats better than the other. Season after season, decade after decade. The archaeological record at sites like Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar, one of the last known Neanderthal refuges, shows Neanderthals clinging to the southern tip of Europe even as modern humans filled the continent behind them. They lasted there until perhaps 28,000 years ago, maybe longer. So imagine that a small group survives in Gibraltar, or the Caucasus, or a remote island off the Scandinavian coast where modern humans simply had no reason to go. A few thousand individuals. Enough to maintain a viable breeding population. Enough to keep going. What happens next? Over thousands of years, that population adapts. Neanderthals were already intelligent enough to create Mysterian tools, a sophisticated stone toolkit that predates most modern human toolkits of the same period. They controlled fire. They appear to have had symbolic thought. The eagle talon ornaments found in Krapina, Croatia, dated to 130,000 years ago, predate modern humans in Europe entirely. They made these things before they ever met us. Given time, isolated from the relentless pressure of competing with modern humans, a surviving Neanderthal population likely develops. Slowly, perhaps. Their social networks were probably smaller. Researcher Francesco D'Erico at the University of Bordeaux has argued that while Neanderthals showed repeated flashes of symbolic behavior, they may have lacked the dense social connectivity that allowed modern humans to spread innovations rapidly across vast networks. A good idea in a Neanderthal band might stay in that band. A good idea in a modern human network in 30,000 BC could travel thousands of kilometers in a few generations. But slow is not stopped. By 10,000 years ago, in this alternate world, what do you find? Two kinds of humans developing agriculture, or one? Two competing civilizations, or two that trade and intermarry along a blurry biological border. Here is where it gets genuinely strange. We know from genetics that when modern humans and Neanderthals met, they did not just tolerate each other. They found each other attractive enough to have children together, repeatedly, across multiple contact events spread over tens of thousands of years. The children were viable. Some were fertile. The species boundary was permeable. In a world where Neanderthals survive into the modern era, the concept of race as your civilization has constructed it becomes incoherent almost immediately. How do you build a racial taxonomy when the being standing across from you is 96% genetically identical to you, speaks a language you cannot understand, and your child with them will be entirely capable of having children of their own? Biologists today debate whether Neanderthals and modern humans were even separate species, or simply two deeply diverged populations of one sprawling, interfertile human family. The word species might have needed to be renegotiated entirely. And the conflict? There would be conflict. You know this because there is always conflict when two groups compete for land, for water, for protein, for territory. But there would also be exchange. Neanderthals were already adapted to cold in ways modern humans were not. Their immune systems had been shaped by European and Asian pathogens for hundreds of thousands of years. The interbreeding your ancestors did with Neanderthals gave modern humans immune genes that may have helped your ancestors survive in environments they had never encountered. In a world with living Neanderthals, that exchange continues. Medicine, agriculture, tool making, adaptation to extreme cold. All of it crosses the blurry genetic border in both directions. Whether through trade, intermarriage, conquest, or slow demographic absorption, the likely long-term trajectory is convergence. The same demographic forces that made isolated Neanderthal populations vulnerable 40,000 years ago would continue to apply whenever a Neanderthal group came into sustained contact with larger, denser, more networked modern human populations. The uncomfortable answer, arrived at through the population genetics work of researchers like Sarah Tishkoff at the University of Pennsylvania, who has studied the genetic consequences of ancient admixture events, is that a surviving Neanderthal population would probably not still exist as a distinct population today. Not because of genocide, because of love, because of children born on the boundary, because of gradual genetic absorption into the larger human gene pool over 10,000 years of proximity. What would be left is not two species. It is one species, slightly different from the one that exists now, with more Neanderthal DNA on average, with a slightly different immune profile, with perhaps a different relationship to cold, to certain diseases, to the basic architecture of cognition itself. You would be a little different. The world would look roughly the same. But here is what stops you, if you sit with this question long enough. Neanderthals did not vanish because they were failures. They survived 400,000 years in Ice Age Europe. They buried their dead. They made music, possibly. They felt grief, almost certainly. They loved their children fiercely enough to keep severely injured individuals alive for years. The skeletal evidence from Shanidar Cave in Iraq shows a Neanderthal who lived for years with a withered arm, a crushed eye socket, and extensive injuries that would have required sustained care from others to survive. They cared for each other. They are gone, and you are here, and 1 to 4% of the code that runs your immune system belonged to them first. On a clear night, when something in the back of your skull stirs with the feeling that you are not quite alone, maybe it is not nothing. Maybe it is memory, carried in the oldest parts of what you are. You are not alone in this world. Not entirely. You never were.